Latin American biotech entrepreneurial community coming together to show the world that innovation is happening no matter where we are. Today, our vision is becoming a reality. Today, we are here in Miami.
Yes, absolutely. We are here in Miami. Welcome, everybody. So we are here to show that innovation is happening everywhere. It's not just happening in Boston or in San Francisco, it's happening everywhere. Just think about the big problems this world is facing. Think about healthcare access. Think about food scarcity. In 2030, we will have 8 billion more people to feed. Think about epidemics, pandemics. We just came out of a pandemic, but just think about things we are seeing at the moment. Tuberculosis is not eradicated, it's still real. Or think about aging population and all the chronic diseases linked to that. And what are we doing to resolve this? Biotech, at the end, is a big answer to it. It's not the only answer, but it's a big answer to it. And we all have a responsibility in it. And this is what we are trying to accomplish here today and tomorrow, where the first time biotech from Latin America is coming to the United States and to show that innovation is happening everywhere. When we started to think about the Ganesha lab, we saw that there is an opportunity to transform good science into good business. I lived in Boston many years. I saw it every day, but it was in Boston, where you walk from Miami, from Harvard to MIT, and you have everything you need. You have the laboratories, you have the investors, you have the industry, you have everything. But scientists and entrepreneurs in not that privileged environments, they don't have that. They don't have access to laboratories. They don't have access to experts, industry. But when you look at Latin America as a region where more than 50% of the biodiversity is available. Where's biotech coming from? It's coming from biodiversity, it's coming from nature, it's inspired by nature. So how can we translate this with good scientists, and good science is in Latin America. I felt it already in 2011-12 when I came to Latin America. But how can we help those scientists and entrepreneurs to really make it happen? And that is at the end, the beginning of the Ganesha Lab in 2017, when we started to help building an ecosystem of support and education for startups. And that's what we do today. We educate startups what it means to take a scientific project towards international markets. This is our specialty. We have built an ecosystem, we have partners, some of them you will meet today, which are helping us with this. But at the end, we have an excellent team, we have excellent support, and at the end, we have been able to build a track record. We have been able to build a track record, and I cannot mention all the examples. I will take one, and I take one which is not here. And why do I do that? First of all, if I pick one from the room, the others say, but why did you pick him or her? So I picked one who's not here. Botanical Solutions. Botanical Solutions came to us when they had a technology proven and already accepted by a large agricultural company, agricultural chemical company, Syngenta. And they said, you know, we have this, but we want to go to the US. How do we do that? We have no context, we have never done this, Can you help us? And so we work with them, we help them to understand what it means. By the way, there's a nice book you should all read. It's called The Power of Culture. Because cultural differences are important to understand when you want to do cross-border business. And that's one of the things we do. We help the startups to understand those cross-cultural differences, which are super essential. So we help Botanical Solutions to go to the United States. That we work with our partners, UC Davis Venture Catalyst. They built out their capabilities, the technology platform they had for an extract out of an endemic plant without using nature, just in the laboratory, in the technology platform. They started to run their EPA trials, that means to get the regulatory approval. And while they were doing this, they recognized this extract has also a huge impact in the pharmaceutical industry as an adjuvant for vaccines. Now they're in a past round A, they're preparing for the round B, they're growing fast. They have one person only in the United States, but that the entire operations and R&D in Chile have tripled the size of the company since then. And now for those investors here in the room, why should that be relevant? The capital needs they have is a third or even less of the capital needs a fully established US company needs. So very interesting value proposition also for investors to think about how can we bring those technologies to market, impacting in Latin America and in the world. Transforming science into good businesses, impacting the lives of millions of people. This is our mission. This is our vision. This is our mission. And with this example, when we think about investments, when we think about track records in investment, we have been able, with this work, to generate a 5x MOIC over a portfolio of 25 companies in 3 years. And we continue to build on that. We have been working this year to build a flywheel strategy where, beside the accelerator, we have been working to bring the financing as well. Because early stage, seed stage financing for biotech in Latin America is literally not existent in a structured way. There are, meanwhile, a few funds coming up who invest in biotech. It's very little still. And we are starting, as of Q1, to close this gap with our fund, where we will generate, through this investment, even more accelerated access to international markets and more access to international investors who co-invest with us, etc. So this is where we are, and this is what we invite you to today, to really get to know the startups, and the startups get to know investors, get to know the ecosystem, understand how this evolution from a purely regional focus to an international focus can be realized. This is the goal for today and for tomorrow. I'm welcoming all the startups which came, and for the investors in the room, these are startups which are not just startups from the Ganesha lab. These are startups which we invited to apply, participating in this event. And why did we do that? Because we really want to build a biotech impact from Latin America, and that cannot just go from one organization. That needs to be brought. So the investors in the room should learn about what's happening in Latin America. Why is it interesting to look at Latin America? Recognize that the technologies coming from there are as powerful as the technologies which are coming out of Harvard, out of MIT, out of UC Davis, out of Stanford, wherever they come from University of Miami, of course. Yeah? It really happens everywhere. It's just the access is sometimes limited when you are in regions which are not as developed as we always say Cambridge is the hotspot. So build new relationships, investors with investors, startups with startups, investors with startups. It's absolutely essential. Also, and really encouraging the startups here, get to know each other, because you can help each other. I want to raise one example. David, stand up. David was one startup who came to us in 2020. After a year, he was accepted in the BIO with family, meanwhile living on what's the island's name, David? Roosevelt Island in New York, with his family, and is raising capital. But what is most important, he is offering every week 1 hour to other startups to give back his experience. And this is what we need to build. And that's why I say, you guys, startups, CEOs, talk to each other, get to know each other, help each other. But the same, investors in the room, get to know each other, talk to each other. Only if we work together, we can have that impact. And of course, we also hope that some of you guys will find matches at the end to continue working towards the future of your projects and of your impact. And of course, all that is not possible without support. So first of all, I want to thank the Venture Cafe. The Venture Cafe, which made this possible together with our ideas, with our impact. So I want to thank specifically Alejandra, who is hiding there. Alejandra, thank you very much. You have worked relentless to make this happening. We know we have good relationships with the Cambridge Innovation Center since years, and we thought it's a natural fit, an organization which is so well connected in the ecosystem. So thank you very much to the Venture Cafe. Of course, thank you. Of course, I cannot leave my team out. So I want to really thank my team, Catalina, get up please, Diego, Camilo. Where's Camilo? Camilo there in the back. And of course, not to forget Monica. Monica is working relentless 24/7 to make this happen, to cooperate with the Venture Cafe and do that from Chile. Not the easiest thing to do, but here we are, a room full of wonderful people. Thank you so much. And of course, I cannot forget our sponsors. So I really want to thank the sponsors who had the guts to believe that this will be something extraordinary. Sponsors who I will call to the stage now to introduce themselves and to speak a little bit about their mission and why they're here. First of all, Nicolás Marchón from ThermoFisher Scientific. He is the marketing director for Latin America. Nicolás, please come up to stage.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure for us to be here. I'm with my colleague Victor here. We're representing ThermoFisher Scientific. And if we have been doing a reasonable job of marketing, most of you at the biotech world, we know a little bit. ThermoFisher is a large multinational company. We have right now 100,000 plus employees. The company has $40 billion a year revenue already. And one of the core values that we have at ThermoFisher is innovation, and hence our presence here in events such as this one. Biotech is not an only, but one of our key segments that we serve. We truly believe that we can transform society, and we used to say, we actually do say that our mission is what makes we get up every day to work, and this mission is to enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. There's no other way to do that unless we use the full potential of biotech. In a lot of Markus' speech, he said something that we also want to make sure it's in our speeches everywhere, which is the only way to make it happen is through collaboration. We have so much intellectual capital in Latin America, yet we might collaborate a little further, not only between the startups and the companies, but also throughout the ecosystems, right? So putting together companies like ThermoFisher, hopefully to enable you guys to fulfill the mission of the companies that are building it, and again, ultimately to bring in a positive impact to the society. So thank you all. I wish you all a very great, good event, and we're here for the support. Thank you, Markus, for the invitation.
Thank you, Nicolás. Thank you for the support. Next, Eduardo Abeliuk. It's a difficult name for me. He's the board member, so Eduardo, it's just the easiest. No? He's the board member of the Center of Translational Biotech from SOFOFA Hub in Chile. Eduardo, thank you so much for the support, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here today, and thanks for the organizers of this wonderful event. In particular to Ganesha Lab for organizing this and for bringing us all here together. I'm here representing SOFOFA Hub. SOFOFA Hub, at the core, it seeks to connect different stakeholders within the innovation ecosystem, and with the goal specifically to use technology and to use biotechnology to solve some of the most challenging problems that different companies, not only in Chile, but throughout the whole region have. So I hope this is an event where everyone can share experiences and connect with each other, make new friends. I think, as Markus was saying, human capital, it's at the core, making connections of what can help us, all of us as a community, solve some of these, pressing challenges. I think, the challenges that humanity will have within the next decade are unprecedented, and it's, I think, pretty clear for everyone here that biotechnology will be playing a key role. So I hope you can make connections, and thanks again for having us.
Eduardo, thank you so much. And last but not least, Nicolás from corporate prospector from Delta Airlines. Andres.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with everyone here today. Thank you to Ganesha Lab and to Venture Cafe for bringing us this opportunity. Today, in some events in the past, people ask, why is Delta here? Why is Delta sponsoring? Why is Delta getting back? And I'll share with you 3 reasons why Delta's here. The first is investing in our communities and investing in the people that live in our communities. Whether it's here in South Florida or anywhere in the world, we're super passionate about giving back and helping you get to your next big idea, helping you succeed, and just giving back. So I'm from Miami, born and raised, and being able to see the growth, especially in the last couple of years, is exhilarating. I never thought that I would be moving back to Miami for a job because I moved away 12 years ago. So seeing the growth that we have here is phenomenal, and again, investing. The second is who we are as an airline and taking you to your next big idea, like I said. We have amazing partners all throughout the world. Here in Miami, we have Air France, KLM, Virgin. Super excited to announce that over a month ago, we just launched a joint venture partnership with Latam. So now bridging that gateway between Miami and to Latin America and beyond. So we're really thrilled to be here to help you succeed. And the last is our people and our culture. And then again, investing in who we are and investing in our growth and supporting you as you guys invest in your people and your company. So thank you again for having us. Thank you again for letting us take part in this amazing event. And I'm happy to share that we're going to be giving away a free round-trip ticket on Delta Airlines. So scan on the bottom if you guys are interested in entering for a chance to win. We'll be giving away a round-trip ticket on Delta Airlines. So we'll have it today throughout the experience. We'll have it tomorrow as well. But like Monica said, Delta's bringing the fun as well to the event. So again, thank you so much for having us. If you can be of any help, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Ignacio, thank you so much. So, thank you very much once more to all the sponsors, to the supporters. A big applause for everybody. Now we are coming to a very important part of this event where we hear from someone who has been there, who's in it every day, someone who has been on the science side, on the educational side, on the investor side, and on the startup side. I'm very happy to announce Carlos Bustamante. Carlos is Venezuelan-American scientist His passion is accelerating genomic discoveries in understudied human populations. Most recently, he founded and is the CEO of Galatea.bio, a company that uses genomics and data science to drive precision health at scale for all. Some of his really impressive track record in his career is he led teams at the interface of genomics, data science, and global health at Cornell University, at Stanford, as well as in the private sector. He co-founded the Stanford Center of Computational Evolutionary and Human Genomics. He was the operational chair of the Department of Biomedical Data Science at Stanford Medicine. He's teaching at the University of Miami and is working with the entrepreneurship and technology groups at the Miami Harvard Business School. In 2019, he joined Fidelity's early stage biotech venture group as a venture partner. It's called F Prime Capital. Please join me in welcoming Carlos. Thank you so much for being here, Carlos.
Hi everybody, how's everybody doing? Good? All right, excellent. So it's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. Normally I tend to give more of a science talk, so I have a bunch of slides that I rely on. I figured today I'd like to keep it a lot more conversational if we could, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I ended up as your keynote speaker, and then would love to leave plenty of time for questions and sort of back and forth. So first, I'm originally from Venezuela, as you heard about. I came to the States as a kid and got lucky enough to end up in Miami early on, and so I ended up actually going to high school in Miami back in the late 80s, early 90s, and Miami back then was a very different city than it is today. And I got to start doing research at the University of Miami. By sheer luck, I had a teacher who was kind enough to introduce me, and I got a good research job. And you know, up until that point, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and the opportunity to get to do research turned my life around. You know, and I found something I was really passionate about, and within a year, I'd actually decided to stay in Miami and try to be a doctor, and I was doing research in the genetics lab, and again, just one of those, you know, wonderful things that happens in life. I'm down in the basement of the Science Center at UN, and I meet this professor who's you know, looking for somebody who can help him do some research on the genetics of this, you know, bug that he worked on. And I was pretty good at programming the computer, and so I helped sort of put together some models for what could be going on, and that got me interested in this whole problem of how do we begin to analyze genetic data. So to make a long story short, I had the opportunity to transfer to Harvard and work in a lab that did this in the big leagues. And so from the time I was about 19, I got to work on this really fascinating problem to me back then that a lot of people didn't care about, which was how do you make sense of genetic data and try to use that in a way that, you know, could benefit everybody, right? And so this was a time, there was a project called the Human Genome Project. I mean, you've heard of the Human Genome Project, right? So when I started, the Human Genome Project was going to be finished in 15 years, right? It was a big government project, it was a big government collaboration. And when you told people, I want to work on the statistics of DNA, they look at you like I'm so sorry for you, right? That sounds like a bad problem that you have, and then I hope you can find someone that can help you with that. And in fact, even a lot of scientists thought this was a crazy idea. And it turned out that there was a guy who was crazier than those of us who were doing this, and he actually started a company to raise the federal government to build the structure of the Human Genome Project. So now this was kind of doubly crazy, right? Because you have this project that a lot of scientists aren't sure about whether it's going to work at all, and then you have a bunch of people who now are going to bet money to race the government to a project that they don't know how they're ever going to make money from in the first place. And so you're thinking, boy, this is kind of nuts. And it was at the end of the 90s, right when the internet was also taking off. And so you just didn't know which way was up. You had pets.com, you had this project called the Human Genome Project that you're now accelerating, and then you had this guy named Craig Venter that's racing the federal government. So what was crazy about this whole time is that there was one entity that was making money hand over fist, and that company was called Applied Biosystems because they sold DNA sequencers. And so they sold DNA sequencers to the federal government, and then they sold DNA sequencers to Schreyer Genomics, which was their spin-out company, and they could peg their quarterly revenues to $1, right? Because they knew exactly how many machines the government was going to buy and how many machines their own subsidiary was going to buy. Cut to the story, they shaved off 10 years from the Human Genome Project. Like, it was unbelievable. They got to this finish line. In fact, they had to have a meeting at the White House where the federal government had to kind of say, well, yeah, we tied. No, they didn't tie. Private enterprise absolutely just smashed through this problem. And then a group of us got very lucky because we were the only people that actually cared about the analysis of DNA. And we ended up with a bunch of the data. It turned out not to be a great business model for the investors who weren't on the sequencing side. So the data science company ended up actually going bust. And luckily, we ended up with the data when I was a professor at Cornell. So my first job as an academic was to make use of these distressed data assets from a company that had done something incredibly daring, but couldn't find a business model to make the whole thing work. During the 2000s, we then took this idea of sequencing genomes and just turned the crank. So we did the human genome, we did the macaque genome, we did the rice genome, and before you know it, you've sort of begun to take what was initially, again, a federal government project, a little bit of a moonshot. We're not sure how anybody's going to eventually, reap a benefit from this, and create an entire new industry, this whole industry of genomics that has now been estimated to be something like a 200x return on the initial investment of building the Human Genome Project. Right, so it was maybe $1 billion, $1.5 billion that went in to build the Human Genome Project. Today, the size of genomics is hundreds of billions of dollars that have been created out of early investment in technology. So I'd love to have us think about a wonderful book. Somebody recommended a book early on. So there's a wonderful book called The Three-Player Game. And it talks about how this sort of happens. And it talks about the three elements that are important. The first is the state and the investment of the state in priming this kind of basic technology. If we hadn't had sequencing technology, we wouldn't have had a company that sold DNA sequencers that then had investors come in and build another company to try to race, right? So that basic technology comes on the back of federal spending. Then you have what many of us in this room are interested in, which is the speculation on early technology. Why? Because the returns are outsized, right? You can go and you bet on, social media early on, you're going to do extraordinarily well. You bet on it late on or too early, you're going to do poorly, right? The same idea. So there's a tiny component to this, but then there's also just what's an inevitable, outcome of the technology. And then the last piece, which is very interesting, is how this all shakes out in the open market. And we reap those years out. So by the time you're actually thinking about the return to early investors, they've actually already cashed out because most of these are wealth transfer vehicles from the public markets back to the early investors. So to me, as I try to sit at the intersection of all of these three, because I've been a founder of a company, met several companies, I've been an investor trying to make decisions about what to bet on, and an academic producing some of the technology as well as thinking about this. What I have found time and again is, you're going to get humbled on all three pieces of this, right? Biotech is an incredibly exciting industry, but it's also an industry that, makes cryptocurrencies look like safe investments, right? Like, do this. Anyone who's been in the market, right? At the height of February 2021, everybody was a genius right, in their biotech choices. And then today, good luck, right? The portfolios have all, potentially been oversold, who knows, pretty high. So my first, I guess, piece of advice is, as we think about trying to build a biotech ecosystem in Miami, we should be humble and figure out what can we do that could put us in a position of strength relative to where the market is and where, other people are betting. And the way I've thought about this is that there's a huge opportunity to diversify clinical trials, right? Most of what happens in clinical trials today, particularly in clinical trials for genetics, happens only in populations of European descent. And so if we were to broaden the lens a little bit and think about how do we get other people into genetic research, perhaps that's an opportunity to both benefit the community and at the same time create a company that has outsized value, because there aren't a lot of clinical trials already happening here. So if you could do one, then you might be able to do a reasonable job and not have to compete with Boston or Chicago or California prices, which are high for this kind of space. So as I've thought about, what would I like to build? I'd like to build long-term businesses that are here to also create jobs that help benefit the community. So part of this for us has been building a full-stack genomics company where we're working with Miami-Dade Community College, as well as the other schools, but Miami-Dade is much bigger than FIU or UM, to give internships, because I need technicians, I need people who can run the machines and get samples processed. So to me, there's actually new ways and new opportunities that begin to sort of tap into what the community needs and what we could bring as investor operators, particularly to the city, that stays true to what the city wants to accomplish as well. Now, from the perspective of how do you make it attractive for other capital to come and see what Miami could be, I think we also have to be very, just sort of realistic about where does capital do well? It does well, it's chased, easy and safe returns, which has been the Harvard spin out, the Stanford spin out, which they charge a premium for, right? So without creating a knowledge economy that attracts those kinds of companies out here, it's going to be difficult to get the firms that want to make that, early big check and bet on Miami. We saw some of this in high tech, but for biotech, it's going to take time, but I think it's very doable with the right opportunities. And to me, that's been, the opportunity to tap into the populations in Miami, the opportunity to work with the public sector in Miami. We've had just tremendous support from the mayor and from the overall community to get the word about what we're trying to accomplish. And so our goal is to build a biobank that's got millions of samples from the US and Latin America. I need a lot of help to get the word out, and being in Miami, for me as an operator, has made a big difference versus trying to be yet another startup in the Bay Area or yet another startup in Boston where I learned venture came initially. But it's a lot harder in some respect to get the attention of the firms in the first place, right? So you have to leave more time to raise money on the founder side. It's also been a funny time in general, and then a particularly funny time in biotech to raise money. So I would say it's not been easy to raise money, but it's been possible to raise money by being disciplined and having the right initial partners that see the vision that you're trying to accomplish. And then maybe the last thing I'll say, and then field some questions, is that we want to have more and more operators in Miami, right? It's possible, of course, to build remote and have remote workers, and we've got remote folks, and that's great, but we want to create a physical presence in Miami. We want to be committed to Miami. We want to see that, at least for me, as CEO founder of the company, something that we're making as an important commitment to why we're here in the first place, right? So we could anchor this company in lots of places. We're anchoring it in Miami because we see this city as an important nexus for capital, for ideas and for talent over the next 20 years, and I think that will benefit the rest of Latin America. So hopefully that hasn't been a little too general, but I figured I'd start there and can dig into any aspect of how did the academics spin out, trying to operate a business in Miami, or how I think about investments, which tend to be a little contrary to others. Happy to open up the floor for questions. Yeah. You clap. Yes, I've got one hand over here. Yes, sir.
So, how do you think that Miami could become like a biotech hub when you compare it, based on what you just mentioned? I mean, the fact that you have like this Keynote University happening in Stanford or Berkeley or Bay Area, in San Diego, in Boston. How do you see that this could become like a relevant hub for biotech, considering that kind of like you need that type of support? I don't know much about Borbolla University or any university, but
Yeah. So I think that 40 years ago, right, the Bay Area was full of orchards and Detroit was full of cars, right? Now it's flipped, so things can flip, number one. And I would say a good example is LA. LA in the last 20 years has become a much, coveted, high-tech destination for startups and capital. There's no reason Miami couldn't do it. I think it's about incentives, number one, and I think number two, it has to play to the strengths of the place. And that's why, for me, betting on Miami is betting on this unique population in Miami and trying to do things that you can't do in other places, like the genetics of the Caribbean and the genetics of, how the last 400 or 500 years of migrations have impacted health and disease in the Latin American continent. That's what and it's great to do that from here, so it's a strategic rationale for anchoring here, but there are other rationales for anchoring here, right? And other kinds of, I think of biotech broader than just medical technology. If I think about white biotech or green biotech or blue biotech, Miami should be at the forefront of blue biotech the same way we should be at the forefront of coastal engineering, right? Like, we are living this day in and day out. We should be at the forefront of trying to attract that kind of talent, which means probably creating opportunities for satellite campuses, right? Carnegie Mellon, for example, would be great. Why shouldn't we have a Carnegie Mellon floor in this building? And this happens in San Francisco all the time. So you can get your MBA from Wharton without ever having to leave the Bay Area and your favorite, avocado toast place, right? They make it very comfortable for you to do that, right? And I don't see any reason why, given we're a big suburb of New York, we couldn't just also have, strong relationships with our, older city sister, on that as well. So I think there's lots of initial partnership models that get us there, and then we just hit hard on the things that we're good at. And, understand that it's going to take 20 years. It's not going to happen over 5 years, but there's a lot you can do in 20 years. And to me, I think there's no more exciting state in the country than Florida, and there's no more exciting city in Florida than Miami. And so the opportunities that many people see, it's not just me who sees this, right? I think there's, the whole room here speaks to why you'd want to think about this as a destination. Other questions? I'll try to be faster in my answers, sorry. Yeah.
Is there a large aggregation of resources that maybe as a founder or as you have more experience, maybe a first-time founder in Florida, that you can reach out to for capital or network, or where do you even turn to as a private entrepreneur in Florida? And are there these central resources in Boston?
Yeah. So I think this building had some shared resources, for example, and I think there are ideas of building more of that kind of space. I think we need incubator space, we need accelerator space, but I think those are all solvable problems once you have, a nucleus of companies that you want to be incubated, that have been done, for example, in this very building, right? So I also think on the data science side, there's a lot of healthcare data that you can imagine moving, you know, sort of a critical mass of people that want to work on healthcare data to Florida, partly because of the way healthcare data is structured and organized. I mean, right now, a lot of that gets actually cleared in Knoxville, Tennessee, right? So there's no reason that you can't build big data science companies actually outside of, you know, Boston and San Francisco. Other questions? I'm curious, how many people here are on the finance side? Okay. So maybe 20%? How many are on the startup side? Ah, most folks here are on the startup side. All right. Okay, so startup questions. Ask me anything, seriously, it doesn't. Yes?
What do you think is the main difference between the American investor and the Latin American?
Great question. Biggest difference between a Latin American investor and a U.S. investor. So I'll answer a slightly different one, which is East Coast investors in the United States versus West Coast investors. So West Coast investors tend to be a lot more aggressive in terms of the price they're willing to pay in a good way, right? So they're a lot less price insensitive, right? Their view is, if the company's going to be worth $1 billion, what do I care if I value it at 25 million or 50 million now? Whereas East Coast investors tend to be far more conservative on price, and I would say most ex-US investors, particularly the ones I've met, tend not to want to invest in companies that aren't already profitable, right? So they're used to saying, oh, I'm going to invest in something that's EBITDA positive that I can make more efficient, right? It's a lot harder to say, oh no, we're going to lose money for the next 5 years. Wait, what? You know, and then we're going to figure out how we get more money to scale out. Wait, how does that work, right? So there's a real leap of faith that needs to happen in general venture capital, right? Because it is, you know, a leap of faith before the company's often even off the ground or has a product. And then certainly in biotech, because it takes longer than in other areas of tech, right? You're not making a chip or an instrument, right? Often you're trying to get to either a reagent or a drug or a device that is in a regulated space. If that takes 5 to 6 years, then you could be tens of millions of dollars in or more before you're even out to market, right? And so those investments tend to be seen as very risky by Latin American and ex-US investors, and so they'll tend to be far more cautious in joining something like that unless there's a very good lead investor that signals to them. So the biggest lesson I've learned in venture capital is to ask who's in the deal for 2 reasons. Number one, most of venture capital tends to be herd mentality. I mean, just to be very frank, right? A lot of it follows after product market fit has been proven out, right? So VCs will tend to want to do what other VCs are doing. So you want to ask who else is in the deal. And then secondly, they signal to each other, right? Who's an early stage investor, who's a medium stage investor, who's a late stage investor. So by knowing who's in the deal, then they kind of have a sense of the commitment of the investors for the long term of the company, right? Because sometimes they want to return over a shorter period of time. In biotech, you want investors who are patient and understand that it might take 6 or 8 or even 10 years to see, you know, money out from the venture. So that's not often clear to many Latin American investors. But I'd love other thoughts on this. I don't know if people have had the same experience. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What is the most probable exit strategy for a biotech company in Latin America and Europe?
So the data is pretty straightforward on this. About 80% of the money that goes into a biotech is venture capital money. And that can, you know, broadly define venture capital, family office, private money. Less than 20% of it is strategic from strategic investor, right? Most of it's private money. And 80% of the exits are M&A, right? That's the most likely exit. And as I like to say, it's a little bit like, when you think about an IPO, you used to say in journalism, if a dog bites a person, that's not a story, right? Dogs bite people all the time. If a person bites a dog, now that's a story, right? So the IPO is the person bites the dog, right? You end up on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, you get to ring the bell. It doesn't happen often. So most of the time, you're going to exit through an acquisition, and most of the time, hopefully you'll get acquired for more money than has already gone into the company, right? But it all depends, and that's also part of the issue that took me a long time to understand, because I've been involved in companies, I've helped start companies, I've been an advisor to companies, and so I loved all my companies, right? I loved talking to all my companies, right? They were great. As an investor, you have to be very choosy, number one, right? You can't invest in everything. No investor ever said, oh, I just invest in everything, right? Everything that comes across my desk, I figure out what the right check size is. Said no investor ever, right? You have to learn to be choosy. And two, the way you make a name for yourself in this industry is by being part of the most splashy deals of the year, right? So if you want to be really good, you want to be in the top 25 deals of the year. Well, who's in the top 25 deals, right? People who were in the top 25 deals last year, right? So it takes a while to get into that book of business as an investor, and most of that has to do with finding an edge, right? So these folks are, for example, very focused on being the VCs that help get technology out of the road, or VCs that help get, out of Harvard Medical School or out of Stanford, right? Those are great companies to invest in because they've tended to do well, and other investors will take turn, and follow on that kind of an investment. Most universities now are trying to figure out how they themselves follow on that bandwagon and commercialize. And I'll just share one interesting observation, just from having seen it. So in 2004, is the Google IPO, people can correct me, I think that's about right, 2004. And at the time of the Google IPO, there's an article in the New York Times called Why Stanford is Happy About the Google IPO. And they give 3 reasons. And they say the first reason is the alumni network. This will be really good for the alumni network. And people are going to come to Stanford because these guys, yes, you might get a couple of more applications, but no, not the alumni network. Number 2, Stanford licensed technology to Google. So Stanford actually had common shares in Google when they IPO'd, and they got royalties and so on. You're getting there. The other is that Stanford had, by contractual obligation of the IP, the opportunity to own up to 10% of Google until it went public, right? So somebody from Stanford wrote Google a $4 million check. It took them 10 minutes. That position at the time of the IPO was worth $300 million in 2004. Of course, they sold part of the position because you never know what's going to happen with these startups, and it's worth $2 billion today, right? So that person who wrote a check to Google did more for the endowment of Stanford than all the Nobel Prize winners put together, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable how these outsized returns are what these guys are chasing, right? And so, and that would be great, but you don't need 100 Googles, you need like 1 Google, right? We need a couple of good companies that want to stake it out here, and then you start creating, the flywheel. Same thing happened in Seattle with Microsoft and others. So it takes a little bit of time, but once they get going, they tend to feed on each other. Yes, ma'am.
That's Miami. Welcome, woman in biotech. I'm from Chile. We have amazing female founder program. Do you have like something like this here?
I I think women biotech founders would be very welcome in Miami. I speak on behalf of the committee. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's got to be very diverse. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. You got to create a welcoming environment, and that's one of the things that made the Bay Area kind of quirky, right? You had all these funny people, and they were founders. And, we gave them too much power, I would say, in some cases, but they were able to build amazing things because they were able to move quickly. And I feel a lot of that spirit in Miami, especially around these, solutions for health, solutions for the environment. I feel there's a lot of optimism and interest in taking those challenges on here. Yeah.
What additional obstacles do American startups have compared to U.S. startups to get funding individuals?
That's a great question. So I think, because investors tend to be snobby and tend to be clubby, then they tend to invest in the things that they know. And so it's very hard to break into that. And so I think you want to make sure that you're putting together the best advisory board you can, people that can introduce you and serve as that bridge, especially if you don't already know the community that you're trying to sell into or break into. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, often one or two people can do a lot of block and tackle for you, but it is important to have, some amount of, connections into the market, but more importantly, connections into the technical due diligence side that will inevitably follow a lot of biotech, right? So, but oftentimes, if it's a good investment, it'll happen. I mean, F-Prime, we did a lot of investments in Europe in small universities that you wouldn't have thought about, but they had very good programs and technically they were excellent. And so I think you can definitely find the right technical investors that will see the value in an investment that's outside of the typical Boston and San Francisco. But it makes it tough, I'm not gonna lie to you.
Carlos.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much to what's coming next. What's coming next is the core of this, is that the startups which came from Latin America to Miami, which took the investment, the time, the effort to prepare themselves, to prepare and show the power of biotech from Latin America towards the United States. We will from here go into a 30-minute coffee break so that we can prepare the rooms, this room and the next room, where we will also, you will see in front which companies and which mega trends will be presented, the 4 mega trends which I mentioned before. They will be presented. That means aging population, related chronic diseases, we will have food scarcity, we will have healthcare access, and we will have epidemics, pandemics. So we will have 2 dolphin tanks in parallel. The first ones will present 7 startups in each room. After that, a short break, and then will come the next 2 groups, 6 and 5. So in total, 25 startups, which you will see, which you will hear, and hopefully which will show that there is a lot of potential to impact the lives of millions of people from Latin America. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 30 minutes.